Good morning, everybody. Sandy Cook and I are going to be presenting about the evaluation assessment of the recent TRACE questionnaire that was sent out to various individuals to assess the current state of affairs of TRACE evidence. We're going to do it in two parts. I'm going to start and do the numerical data evaluation, and then Sandy Cook will be doing the comments in regards to significant issues as well as the National Academy report. And after we're done, we're going to open it up to you guys for discussion and hoping to generate quite a bit of discussion. And we just ask that everybody, when you approach the microphone, that you state your name and your organization that you represent. The goal of the assessment was to assess the current state of affairs of TRACE evidence. We actually sent out a questionnaire to lab employees as well as law enforcement employees, and we captured a lot of data, but we're just going to highlight some points here and hope to publish the remaining data. And the points that we're going to talk about today is how are we perceived within the TRACE community and from other disciplines, what sub-disciplines are being analyzed and what methods are being used, what are the significant issues facing TRACE evidence, and what is the impact of the National Academy report on TRACE evidence. The questionnaire was distributed to the ASCLD lab delegates, the attendees of the FBI Management Symposium, regional organizations. All of you here present in this room received one as well, and it was also posted on the AFQAM website, and it was posted on the TRACE Yahoo group. So I apologize if people received it numerous times. We ended up with 149 responses, representing at least 102 laboratories. I say at least 102 laboratories because we did receive some that were anonymous, and I don't know if they represent new laboratories or if they were from laboratories already represented. So we did get quite a few responses. For the data analysis, each participating laboratory was included once, except for some of the larger systems such as Michigan and Florida and Texas, where they have regional TRACE laboratories. We ended up with 121 responses included in the data analysis. And the data analysis is for the numerical data, and then everybody was included in what Sandy will be talking about in regards to the significant issues in the National Academy report. Out of the 121 responses, 104 labs currently have a TRACE evidence unit dedicated. The remaining 17 labs did not have a unit dedicated to TRACE evidence analysis. This was the breakdown of the 102 labs represented in the results of the questionnaire. We did have 8 federal laboratories, and then we did have a good population of state laboratories as well as local laboratories, and there were 4 laboratories that left the answer blank. And we had it from both national laboratories and international laboratories. Here's a breakdown of the accrediting bodies for the TRACE laboratories. As you can see, the majority is from ASCLD Lab Legacy, but we do have a fair number being international. And those of you who've been talking with John Nooner, that seems to be changing, and that probably the next time we have our symposium, you will see a change from Legacy to international being the primary accrediting body. We did have 3 labs that were accredited by FQS, and there were 7 laboratories that were not accredited at all. And then we also had 7 laboratories that were accredited by another accrediting body, and those are primarily international laboratories. Here's a breakdown of the subdisciplines being analyzed by TRACE laboratories of the 102 TRACE laboratories. I'm sorry, 104 TRACE laboratories, and you can see that paint and fiber are the primary disciplines, as well as physical match, and soils and feather are on the back end. And you can see hairs are still being represented by a good portion of laboratories, as well as glass. We had 96 laboratories that were currently conducting paint analysis. Everybody was doing a macroscopical or microscopical exam of the paint evidence, followed by the majority of the population doing FTIR analysis and polarized light microscopy. SEM-EDS did have a fair number of folks doing that method as well, whereas XRF and XRD being only represented by a few laboratories. For fibers, we had 96 laboratories currently conducting fiber analysis. Again, we have 100% of folks doing macroscopical or microscopical examination of the evidence and followed closely behind by polarized light microscopy. The majority of folks, and almost all folks, are doing FTIR, but there are some laboratories that are not currently doing FTIR analysis on fibers, and not all laboratories are doing comparison microscopy. There's only a small portion of laboratories that are currently doing thin layer chromatography for fiber analysis. Glass was represented by 69 laboratories, and as you can see, the majority of folks were doing color analysis, and then a lot of folks were doing the refractive index at the various wavelengths. And there's not too many people that are doing libs. Human hair comparisons. 75 laboratories are still doing human hair comparisons, and all the 75 laboratories, 100% of folks are doing the suitability for DNA analysis. 81% are doing macroscopical comparisons, and 77% are still doing microscopical comparisons. More folks are doing somatic origin versus racial characteristics. Animal hair. 75 laboratories are doing some sort of examination for animal hair examinations. 71% of those laboratories are doing species determination. 52% are doing microscopical comparisons, and 48% of the 75 laboratories are doing microscopical comparisons on animal hairs. This chart represents the caseload for the past 5 years, and as you can see, the majority of the labs, which is encouraging, has either increased their trace evidence caseload or has remained the same, and only a smaller portion has decreased their caseload. This chart represents the monthly case output per analyst, with the majority of folks completing 1 to 4 cases per month, followed by 5 to 8 cases a month being the next dominant category. There were some folks that are doing 20+ cases a month, and those folks are primarily doing arson or GSR. This chart represents the number of trace analysts versus the total population of forensic scientists in the trace laboratories that participated in the survey, questionnaire. We have only a small slice of the pie, as you can see, that 92% of the total population of forensic scientists is something other than trace evidence, and we represent 8% of the population. This chart demonstrates the years of experience that was asked on the questionnaire, and as you can see, it's very encouraging that we have a lot of new examiners into the field. And then it's somewhat concerning that we also have a lot of examiners with 20+ years that will soon be leaving. One of the questions we asked was that who's a generalist versus who's a specialist? Can we see a trend that's being developed versus what used to be versus what is now? The majority of folks are becoming generalists, with only a small population being specialists. There were some labs that trained both as far as generalists and specialists, and the thoughts were that they are now training as generalists, but they would like to be specialists, and there are still a few folks within their labs that are truly specialists. But it did seem the trend was going towards that with the lack of funding and the increased demands, that people need to start doing more disciplines, and there isn't as much time or emphasis on specialists. And then there was also about 10 questionnaires that left the answer blank. And this chart represents the number of lab analysts that are currently processing crime scenes. And about, as you can see, about 50 or so people are still processing crime scenes of the survey response. And there were 17 labs without trace evidence. There were 6 labs that at one time had trace evidence. And here were the reasons for elimination of trace evidence. And this is directly from the questionnaire. We are a small state. We did not receive many trace cases. It was expensive and difficult to keep an examiner competent. And another person from the same laboratory wrote, no second analyst for peer review, lack of demand due to the lack of investigators' knowledge of availability. Other folks wrote loss of staff and no replacement made, which is somewhat discouraging in the sense that if you remember that previous slide, that there was quite a few people that are getting ready to retire. And is this something that we'll see more in the future? The fact that when people leave, are they not going to hire a new person? Lack of casework. Hairs, fibers, paint, glass, footwear, and tire tracks were eliminated due to the lack of staffing and state-of-the-art equipment, budget, and lack of submitted cases. And I left this one for last. Backlogs in biology and DNA and firearms force a relocation of resources out of the trace into those units. And I will turn it over to Sandy Cook.